if you believe in aliens. And yes, by aliens, I mean extraterrestrial life. Okay, a good amount of you all. Well, I do, and I know my mom does, and she's on right now. But I also love watching movies that delve into hypothetical futures where humans encounter aliens on Earth. One of my favorite movies is District 9. It follows a story of aliens who live in detention centers in South Africa and experience violence at the hands of humans. I highly recommend you all watch this. One of the valuable lessons of the movie is justified violence, abuse, and oppression that happens to beings when they are written off as other aliens. The film was inspired by real-life events in South Africa during apartheid, specifically the racial tensions between native South Africans and Zimbabwean refugees forced to live segregated lives in low-income ghettos. This important message is one I hope you will take with you after this presentation. Justifiable violence, abuse, and oppression begins with dehumanization. Like Toni Morrison once said, before there can be a final solution, there must be a first, second, and third one. Steps, not a jump to our own human demise. Today, I will be presenting my policy brief on humanizing the immigrant by abolishing immigrant detention, issuing reparations for those detained, and beginning a truth-telling process in the United States. I would like to give a special thanks to my two reviewers, Dr. Pinero Shields and Dr. Fiershow, for their wisdom, time, and patience in supporting my research. I would also like to give special thanks to my family and friends who are here virtually and in person. And then I would like to issue a trigger warning that we will be talking about difficult and violent issues related to immigration. And if at any time you need to step out, please feel free to do so. Here's the roadmap for today's presentation. My policy brief and presentation are for immigration activists. The threefold policy recommendations I give provides advocates with the necessary research, data, and policy plan necessary to make humanizing the immigrant an imaginable future for all. The four key messages I want you all to take away from this presentation are that immigrant detention system is unjust and inhumane. Abolishing detention is achievable and essential for ending the cycle of violence detention facilities perpetrate. Reparations bring justice for the violence enforced and equity for the poverty detention creates. Truth-telling is essential to heal and change the public narrative for a long-term system transformation to take root. Today, the United States operates the largest immigrant detention system in the world. To provide scale, every year, 500,000 people are locked up in the detention system. During the last two presidential administrations, 40,000 people were held in detention daily, with around 185,000 people deported every year. And since 2003, over 200 people have died while detained. Haitians have the highest deportation rates and abuse rates among all immigrants nationalities, while Black and Latinx immigrants have the highest detention rates by race. All of this tells us that the detention system is unjust and inhumane. So what is the root of the problem? Why do people immigrate to the United States? Why does the United States abuse, detain, and deport them? The two factors of expulsion that push people to immigrate to the United States are unjust economic relations and military interventions, as seen with the worker exploitation, NAFTA, and then military interventions in Haiti, the Northern Triangle, and war on drugs. And then the embedded racist immigration policies and a criminalization-focused detention system make the factors of immigrant reception into the United States violent and ineffective. These factors create a cycle of violence abroad and at home that processes immigrants through without little regard for their well-being. So let's dig into the factors of reception. First, with the racist immigration history. Immigration in the United States is governed through plenary doctrinal power. Plenary power is a legal doctrine established by the Supreme Court when it upheld the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1889. It gives the power over immigration policies to Congress and the executive branch exclusively. So under the argument that immigration is a foreign policy and national security issue, thus making immigration policy fall outside of judicial review. Plenary doctrinal power allows exclusionary and racist immigration policies to pass unchecked, like the immigration nationality quota we saw in the 1920s, and the continuously restrictive asylum status and temporary protected status elopements we see today. These policies serve as the basis for racist immigrant permissibility in the United States. This beautiful map by the Detention Watch Network breaks down the factors of reception that perpetrate violence. So first, incarcerating people over civil violations, then by having no legal counsel or trial ensured for people detained, often tearing families apart and holding people in inadequate places. And then those who are able to temporarily leave detention centers while they wait a decision often have to pay bail or bond. The minimum bond amount is usually $1,500 as a condition for release. The average bond release amount, though, is actually $5,827. And it is continuously through judges that decide the bond amounts that immigrants should pay, which many of them can't. And this creates a poverty-based detention system where the poor are discriminated against. There are alternatives to immigrant detention that I will talk about more later on, but for now, know that they also perpetrate violence by putting the cost on immigrants and being mechanisms for intense government surveillance. Here are the frameworks I will be using to analyze current and proposed policies. First, I will use Lani Guillermo and Gerardo Torres' magical realism metaphor of the miner's canary and the toxic cave to analyze whether policies are addressing the toxic detention system or simply providing gas masks or individual support systems for immigrants. This is a tool for determining whether policies are band-aid solutions or create systemic change. Next, I will use Ibrahim X. Kendi's anti-racist policy analysis approach to determine whether policies are grounded in community and do not see people as profit. And third, I will use John Gavente's theory of power and powerlessness through the 3 dimensions of power. First one being that identifies a policy as having surface level impact with clear winners and losers. The second dimension of power looks at the hidden agendas, so who sets the rules and ultimately benefits. And then the third dimension of power is invisible power, so who gets to decide the national discourse and change the public narrative. So I broke down my policies within that. Here are some headlines that show us how immigrant detention is toxic to immigrants. Headlines like forced hysterectomies, numerous deaths, and discriminatory higher LGBTQ detention are just some of the things that tell us that the detention system is the toxic mine, and we put gas masks on immigrants to navigate. Here's a breakdown of what current policies and government alternatives to detention are. So first, ICE has a mandatory detention policy, and with this comes a bed mandate. Yes, like it sounds. We have contracts with private and municipal companies saying that we have to keep a minimum number of beds paid for. And currently that's 32,500 beds, 2,500 for families and 30,000 for adults. Together, this bed mandate costs $78 million a year, even though sometimes the bed mandate is not, like we are not detaining people that much, we are still paying for them to be held in detention because of the contracts. And this kind of averages out to $208 per person. This is a toxic mine rooted in profit to the government and private companies who run over 79% of the detention centers. Then there are 2 alternatives to detention programs: the Intensive Supervision Appearance Program, ISAP, and the Family Case Management Program, FCMP. ISAP uses a combination of single application GPS surveillance, smart link apps that do check-ins over like tablets and phones, and then telephone tracking to monitor immigrants in restricted areas outside detention centers. They are way cheaper than detention, but are as invasive, dehumanizing, and restrictive. So they qualify as toxic gas masks to the toxic immigrant detention system. Additionally, they are often privately run, creating a $122 million market to surveil immigrants. The FCMP is the newest model of an alternative to immigrant detention. However, it is run by GeoCorp, which is a private company with no prior experience in case management. And this is what they were now hired to do. And they have some of the highest history of detention abuses because they operate all other alternatives. So they operate detention centers. They supply a lot of the operations behind the detention centers. They also operate a lot of the surveillance supervision programs. So they literally got a conflict of interest in investing in a family case management program because they receive more revenue from all the other programs. And so they maximize their profit by investing in other things and lobby for mandatory bed mandates in order to increase their profits. Overall, these alternatives are often privately run, invasive to immigrants' well-being, and profit-centered. So, because mandatory detention is unjust and inhumane, and the alternatives to detention currently in place also perpetrate violence and a dehumanization of immigrants by seeing them as an opportunity for profit, I propose a threefold solution to divest and invest in detention, following Gavente's 3 dimensions of power. So first, abolishing detention by calling for communities, not cages, visibly changes who is seen and treated like a criminal, affecting the first dimension of power. Then reparations gives immigrants symbolic and monetary hidden power to invest and repair their communities, the second level of power. And third, truth-telling affects the third dimension of power by changing the national narrative on immigration and making detention unacceptable and with no repercussions so that it does not happen again. There is no easy way to go from detaining 500 million people to 0. But, I created a plan to try to do that. I provide a community-centered, gradual solution to immigrant detention. By shutting down the 10 most abusive detention centers in the United States, this gradual shutdown of centers by most violent and placement of immigrants in community-led programs would eventually lead to shutting down all 121 centers currently in place in the United States. Next, I propose pairing detention abolition with reparations for those held in the 10 centers first closed, then creating a truth-telling process, first in the communities those first detention centers were located. Here is a breakdown of the 10 detention centers to be closed with the Detention Watch Network's First 10 campaign. The Road to Abolition ends with the Communities Not Cages campaign. So these 2 campaigns would first impact 11,190 people held in the 10 detention centers and gradually increase to impact over 7.1 million people held in 121 centers around the United States throughout the year. So the wide support for the sanctuary movement during the Trump campaign shows us that there is a wide support for protecting immigrants and communities and that these plans are feasible. So the second part of my solution is reparations. Reparations have a precedent from Japanese internment when a class action lawsuit led to individuals detained being awarded $20,000 by the government. In 2005, the California legislature passed a Mexican Apology Act acknowledging wrongs committed through unconstitutional removal. This tells us that both parts of reparations, symbolic and monetary acts, are possible and with precedent. To be as close to anti-racist as possible, this program should have a community-led communication via education and awareness of reparations program. So how will this be paid for? CBP, Customs and Border Enforcement, and ICE regularly seize $1.4 billion in currency every year. This money goes to the Treasure Forfeiture Fund, where the Attorney General distributes these funds for forfeiture operations. I propose using some of these funds to create an immigrant detention reparations fund. The high level of taxes immigrants pay in the United States and the high number of remittances immigrants send offers the opportunity for this reparations program to be a global wealth distribution program that would address the toxic economic factors of expulsion that lead to immigration. So counting for the first 10 immigrant detentions that would be closed, so 11,190 immigrants, multiplying that, by 20,000 as, a potential number just for our estimates right now, that would total out to $223,800,000. This is a small chunk of 1.4 billion. So next, any reparations program must be paired with a reconciliation program to be effective. And in this case, I propose a gradual truth-telling process beginning in the first 10 communities where the first 10 centers were closed. Truth-telling, like it was done with the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission, offers the opportunity for community healing through dialogue, psychological support, and community memorialization activities. So remember the 4 key messages I want you all to take away from this presentation. The immigrant detention system is unjust and inhumane. Abolishing detention is achievable and essential for ending the cycle of violence detention facilities perpetrate, and reparations bring justice for the violence enforced and equity for the poverty detention creates. Truth-telling is essential to heal and change the public narrative for a long-term system transformation to take root. Thank you. Questions?
I don't know if you're going to be able to see who has questions in the room, but why don't you decide, like, maybe take one online, then I'll find one in the room for you, and we'll go back and forth.
Sounds good. We can start off with Bandita. Sorry, Vandita, do you want to start?
You're on mute if you don't know that. Vandita.
I just have
Oh, okay. So maybe want to move to Allison? Allison, yeah, thanks.
Wonderful job, Mariela. And I think the truth telling is an especially wonderful touch to include in that. I was wondering if you could elaborate on how you see this getting passed. Is it something that Congress would do? Do you think it would require like a Democratic supermajority? That kind of thing. But wonderful job.
Thank you so much. You know, that is $100 billion question. And that was one of the reasons why when starting my presentation and my policy brief is I specifically made this for immigration advocates, because I think often political feasibility is a big question that prevents any research, any data into the question of can immigration be abolished from ever even starting. And so there are currently 2 campaigns through the Detention Watch Network that are attempting to make that possible. And, you know, what that entails is changing minds and hearts. So, you know, there's, as you well know, there is unfortunately a lot of bias, racism, and just general barriers to seeing immigrants as people, and therefore able to receive benefits and protections. And so beginning with shutting down the first 10 detention centers that are most abusive, it has already started because of the proven track record of human rights abuses that have happened. They have been able to successfully shut down some detention centers. But the political shift from just shutting down detention centers that have cases of like mismanagement, abuse, to actually actively trying to shut them down and then not reopen is an uphill battle. And there are some Democratic legislators who are in support of that, but unfortunately, it is not yet a majority or even something, you know, our president believes is a priority. And hopefully, you know, as this process unfolds and, you know, a truth-telling process kind of happens where we are airing out grievances, we are reflecting more critically on how we incarcerate people and treat them, this dream can become a reality. Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions? Adam, and nice and loud, please.
Yeah, great job, Mariela. Thank you for teaching us today. You mentioned early on in your presentation, you brought up like U.S. foreign policy as being directly related to the immigration situation we're in domestically. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on changes that would need to come simultaneously with like U.S. foreign policy as we work on this domestic policy.
Thank you so much, Adam. Great question. Also, hello, I miss you. You know, thankfully, I had someone earlier today who, you know, prepped you all for this question by presenting on the war on drugs. I feel like that's one really clear, easy way to, in some ways, deal internally with foreign and domestic policy. Often people think of the war on drugs as only US based. The United States, intense criminalization of people who use drugs, but then also on high deportation of people who are charged with having any amounts of drugs on them. And this unfortunately then creates expulsions into different countries where people don't have resources to make a living, and therefore create a cycle of immigration where they come to the United States seeking benefits and protections, have family that they left behind, all of that. And then continuously, the demand for drugs in the United States, the demand for people, for labor, all of those things are things that fuel immigration to the United States. And so one way that the United States could shift its foreign policy is in some ways through legalizing drugs in the United States or decriminalizing them. This would be one way to kind of stem the mass exodus of people that we are deporting back to the United States over like drug charges, misdemeanors, things like that. And that would automatically lower the flow of people who are being sent back without any resources or family. That's just one. I have many. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions? Rachel.
Yeah, great job, Mariela. Just thank you for dreaming big for us, because someone needs to do that. Can you talk a little bit more? I loved your criteria for analysis. That was so, I think, different than anything we've seen so far. And could you just maybe talk more about how you arrived with those different frameworks?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking, Rachel. I appreciate you, and also I missed you. Yeah, I think immigrant detention, immigration in general, immigration policies in the United States often don't happen. We have not seen any transformative or even real, tangible, systemic policy passed within our legislature in many years, because a lot of the bog down in political feasibility, in political support, in what the rollout of that policy would be, the burden on taxpayers, all of those things are things that often are at the forefront of any conversation when it comes to immigration, that prevent us from ever being able to even flesh out what that policy would look like in practice and what difference it would make on people's lives. And so I think it was especially important for the policy proposal talking about immigrant abolition to not start there, and to start in a humanizing way, by talking about people, by centering anti-racism, by centering, reflecting on this capitalist state we live in that continuously makes a profit out of immigrants. And so it felt wrong for me to look at political feasibility when talking about immigrant detention. It felt wrong to look at how much money would we save if we just stop detaining people? I tried to insert numbers, when talking about how many people are detained, how many people currently pay for alternative to detention, how much cost there is to do bed mandates, but I did not say that would be money that would be more effectively used or money that would be saved. It's just money that we are already spending and could be spent to repair our communities, to support immigrants, all of that. And so that was something I feel very strongly about. Thank you for asking.
Yes.
I actually have more of a comment rather than a question, and it kind of builds off of what you were just talking about. I really appreciated how you set up your presentation kind of in phases. And, I think you made a couple comments here and there about this is going to be a difficult task. Political feasibility is often a consideration, but I think the way that you showed it, where with each phase, your reach is going to be that much bigger. I think that was a really cool and striking way to kind of incentivize people caring about this issue. I know that sounds horrible, but the increase in reach that you showed was really striking, and I think a good move for this presentation. So well done.
Thank you so much. I'm giving you a virtual hug. I appreciate that. It was hard.
I'm sure. Yeah. So thank you so much, Mariela. That was awesome.
And I just wanted to congratulate you on following your instinct and thinking really big, as has been said. It's striking that it took 22 years to get a policy passed that is a revenue generating policy for the registry of motor vehicles, for the insurance industry, and it goes on and on and on. That is a public safety. Who wants to be on the road with other people who aren't licensed? Such a common sense thing took 22 years. Mm-hmm. So in light of that, when we are faced with problems that can't get through in the kind of the standard policy avenues, then your instinct is right to look at other ways and to speak to people outside of the traditional policy design, right? So you're talking to activists. And so I think that was daring, and you pulled it off. So congratulations.
Thank you so much. And I'm sorry I can't be there with you all in person, but really thank you so much. I could not have done it without you all and your support and your imagination and creativity. So I just really, especially you, Alexandra, you are phenomenal. And thank you for being, a beacon in the darkness of the world for all of us.
Okay, we'll go to Susie next.
Congratulations, agree with everyone, so powerful. We really do show us there is a way this can be done, and appreciated the human-centered focus and all the frameworks. We're just talking about the reach and in all of the phases of your solution. I know you've thought a lot about, but is there more that you can see that can be powerful from both the stories and the numbers around the families of those that would be direct, everyone would be directly impacted, but is there more that in your research that you're thinking about that could come from the power of when you incorporate not just those directly detained, but all of their families and all of the others that are impacted in their lives? Is there work being done around that you think is important?
Yeah, thank you. And also good to see you. Thank you for coming. Yeah, that's a great question. I think, so, like all spaces, especially activist, passionate, doing spaces, there is a lot of strong opinions and advocacy. And so unfortunately within the immigration space, there has also been a lot of back and forth on which campaigns to prioritize, which lives to prioritize and help protect. And unfortunately, even though oftentimes this can seem like a necessary question to ask because we have to do actions and we have to, do something, I think this has often come at a cost where men, predominantly like men of color, are often deprioritized when it comes to incarceration or leaving detention. So I know especially during the Trump administration, there was a priority for ending family separation. And the first 10 detention centers that I proposed, I believe 3 of them are detention facilities. So oftentimes there's detention centers that are purely for families. And, funnily enough, not funnily enough, but conveniently enough, it is more expensive to detain families. They have like special facilities that come at like $308 per family. And so in some ways there's an incentive to detain families because there's more profit that people gain from detaining them, though there has been executive orders by the Biden administration to deprioritize family separation, family incarceration. But not all of these initiatives, unfortunately, have been able to take place. And so, yes, I do wish that vulnerable populations like families could be prioritized to be removed from detention. However, yeah, it was hard. There were so many vulnerable populations, like, for example, the LGBTQ community, specifically trans individuals, are more likely to be kept in solitary confinement, are more likely to be considered flight risk and then forced to be detained for longer times than any other population. And there has been an active call as well to just call for eliminating LGBTQ detention and like trying to address LGBTQ immigrants. But then I feel like if you advocate for those types of things, then people get left behind. And then there's like a level of permissibility that then happens for some people, but not for others. So, it's a hard question.
Thank you. Michael, last question.
Mariela, thank you so much. I just want to echo what others have said about your bravery and your approach here. I think when we're talking about human rights, civil rights, when we're talking about family separation, taking away, fundamentally what it is to be human, we probably shouldn't be talking about cost-benefit analysis. We should be talking about human rights, fundamental rights. One observation that I have, and here I'm stealing from Dean Madison's question about encouraging people to run for us. When I saw your presentation, you had some really sophisticated theoretical background and concepts that you married with data collection. It seems to me that that's perfect for a PhD. And my question to you is, have you considered getting that?
And I'll just echo, the policy group supports that.
Thank you so much, Mary. Well, currently right now, I'm kind of like I never want to see a textbook ever again in my life. But I mean, who knows? I love writing, and I think definitely more research, more work is needed on this issue and this topic. Who knows? I think, give me at least 10 years before I see another the inside of the school again.
Thank you for all you contributed to the programs in our school.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. And unfortunately, I won't be able to be at tomorrow's dinner, but hopefully I'll see you at commencement and we'll get to say goodbye then.
Great. Thank you so much, Mariela. Great job. One more 15-minute break, starting promptly at 4 o'clock for 2 more excellent presentations. So come back and join us for those.